So, the topic of medicine is a huge topic for discussion. It's one I really want to talk about. Now, this could be from past or it could be recent. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be something prehistoric. But the changes that can happen to society because of the advancements in medicine are just difficult even to fathom. And I'll even share some personal experiences about that. But imagine a time when there really wasn't much that they could do medically. So, even when you look at things that happened biblically, so things in the time of the Bible time of Christ, and it seemed to be the only thing that could be done was if the Savior or someone with faith could heal them, great. Otherwise, there's not much that could be done. They really didn't have many technological answers to medical problems. So in that case, if you start thinking about psychologically, and I know that's in some of the papers I was reading for the first three-page paper, that was one of the hardest things that seemed to be for students to understand how to discuss was from a psychological perspective. So think about this one in terms of a psychological perspective. If you don't have any means to solve medical problems, so you have children, and in a place where you don't have access to any medicine or anything like that, if anything goes wrong, and there are no flu shots and there are no other shots, so there are diseases around spread from various different things, in a lot of cases by water, or by what people have put into water. But anyway, so there's all these diseases and things that can go wrong, and deformities. So if your children have any of those diseases or any of those deformities, they die, or they're just very sick, and that's all there is to it. Now imagine if that's the way it is, that psychologically you'll have to get used to it. You'll have to cope with it. So you'll just have mechanisms to expect maybe children to die. I mean, if you have a certain number of children, and some of them will die, and that's just the way it has been in past ages. So here's my point there: the way you feel, the way you create bonds and with children may be different. It may be that human beings were very good at stopping themselves from having total care, a total bond with babies, if they knew that there's a 50% chance or a 60% chance or whatever it was that the baby's not going to survive. Psychologically, on the inside, your emotional state may be different. Now, if you expect your children to survive, like we do now, so I'm jumping right to the modern era, we come to the stage where we have an expectation that we can fix things. We have an expectation because of all the medical advancements, incredible things that have been done, so that children survive. Well, maybe that completely changes our psychology towards our children. Maybe that's a big difference in the modern age. Maybe we expect the children to survive, so we allow ourselves to have these really strong bonds right from the beginning, because we're not expecting 60% of them to die. And that sounds like a harsh thing, but and it's very difficult to transpose our thoughts back on the past. But they did used to have large families. And one of the reasons was that if they needed a certain number of children to replace them on the farm or whatever it was, then they actually did have to plan to have a certain number of babies so that enough of them would survive for that to be the case. And then you had things like the Black Death and the plague and other things that just wiped out families, and so and then how the psychological scars could come to pass if you have your entire family wiped out. There was just huge numbers of people in Europe who were wiped out by the Black Death and the plague and such forth. So I can see that there could be an enormous psychological difference between how parents feel about their children, and how they their emotional perspective, their emotional uh, motivations towards children, based on knowing that half of them are going to die, or expecting them to live. That to me is a big difference. So that's just one aspect. There's loads of aspects. So let me tell you about a personal story, kind of illustrate how it is now, and how that has changed, and how these incredible things have changed our society. So 5 years ago, we had a daughter born to us called Chloe. I had some wonderful spiritual experiences in connection with this story, and I'll tell them very quickly to you now. Basically I had a vision of this little girl about, I think Cree must have been about 4 months pregnant, maybe 3 months, and we were debating names for children, and we, for some reason, we were talking about girls' names, and it was kind of funny because I said I liked the name Chloe, and my wife instantly said she didn't like it at all. And we normally all have agreed on names, but at that point, for some reason, it stuck in my mind, and I had this spiritual feeling that this was the name for the child. And so I had to come back to my wife and say, "Honey, I know you don't like this name, but it just keeps coming back, and it's inside me, and it's kind of I feel that this is supposed to be the name for the child." So we talked about it, and anyway, so right about this time, that's kind of just a side note, but right about that time when we were talking about it, I had this vision in the day where I saw this little child, a toddler, maybe like 2 years old, 3 years old, with this dark hair and this lovely smile, and very much looking like my wife's side of the family. She's got some nieces that are very similar to what I saw in this vision, and that's also unusual in my family. It seems to be the Griffiths, my side of the family, genes are very strong. All the rest of my children seem to be very much from my side of the family. So anyway, I had this kind of saw this picture of this girl in front of me, and kind of just forgot about it. Told my wife about it, and wrote it down in my journal. And then when Kareen gave birth. And we had a home birth. At the time I was back at school that's a whole nother story, in Provo doing my master's and PhD, and we couldn't afford a maternity insurance, so we were not insured for having a baby. And in England we were never used to that, because you never have to pay for having babies. It's just part of the National Health Service, so it was kind of an unusual thing for us. But we paid for a midwife to have a home birth. So we had this midwife, we had home birth. We never had a problem with babies. So we had the baby at home, and that kind of happened all very nicely on a Sunday, and out pops this little dark-haired baby, just absolutely from my wife's side of the family. And this is, without question, this is the baby I've seen in the blessing. And then we both feel now very strongly that she should be called Chloe, and all these things going on. So no problem at this point. But she was a very small baby, 5.5 pounds. About 2 weeks later, Kareen had taken Chloe to the midwife just for a checkup, and Chloe had lost weight. Normally by this point a baby would have picked up weight, and the midwife said, I don't know, it seems that everything's all right, but I feel like you should probably go and see the doctor because of the loss of weight. Now Kareen went to try and book an appointment in the Student Health Centre in Provo, and it's always really booked. It's very difficult to get an appointment, and she couldn't. But then she got a phone call later saying there's been a cancellation. Can you come in? So Kareen took Chloe in, and then saw a doctor. And I got a call. I was in a class at the time, and I got a call. I had to rush to the health centre, and Kareen was in tears. Well, as it turns out, the doctor who had seen Chloe was a retired heart cardiologist, so a heart specialist, had looked at Chloe, taken some X-rays, and Chloe's heart was 10 times bigger than it should be, and the doctor said, I don't know what exactly, but she's got some form of heart disease, and they recommended that we rush her to the primary children's hospital in Salt Lake on the helicopter. But it's funny because he wasn't saying that that she was going to die. He just said, I think we should get her up there for tests. So, because I wasn't sure, I said, we can't take the helicopter. We don't want a $10,000 bill straight off the bat. So we drove her up. It took an hour, and it took us ages to find the people who were waiting for her. But in the end, it was the emergency staff who were waiting for her. And as soon as they got her, they took her, rushed her away from us and tubes in her because she was basically minutes from death, and we had no idea. So she was basically about to die. They kind of got her on the tubes that can kind of keep her alive for a while, found out what the problem was. She had 2 holes in her heart, and she had a coarc. And a coarc is where there's a major artery that runs from the top of your heart to the bottom of your body, and a coarc means it goes thin for part of that artery, which means that the heart is working way too hard to try and pump the blood through that narrow passage, and eventually the heart will just kill itself and give up, which was what was about to happen. And it only happens about a couple of weeks after a baby is born for it to actually make a difference, because before that there's a special artery that children have, and it's to do with, I can't remember exactly, it's to do with the fact that they're in the womb, and it's to do with connecting them to the mother's blood system somehow, and that stays open and working for the first 2 weeks, and as it starts to close, if there's any other problem, it only shows up about that point. So they found this out, and they said she had to have open heart surgery, and that was going to be 2 days later. And so it was traumatic for us, but we have the gospel in our lives. So if it was her time to go, then it would have been harsh. But back to what I said earlier, because we expect children to live, we already had this really super strong bond with this tiny little baby who was just really cuddly, a really cuddly little baby. And so it was hard, and especially for Corinne. And then so she had to have open heart surgery. I think it was 5 hours. And that was really kind of difficult to go through, even though we would have accepted it if she'd have passed on. But it was hard, and then at the end of it, when they came out of open heart surgery, and they had to sew, it's incredible, they sewed up or fixed the 2 holes in her heart, and the heart is only like this big, it's like a walnut, it's tiny at that age, and somehow they managed to get into the heart and fix 2 holes and cut the artery where either side of the thin part, and then stretch it together again, which is just this incredible thing. And they've got her on this. While they're doing that, she's on the I can't remember the term for it, but basically she's got this this machinery functioning for her heart, this life support system where her heart's not even doing it. So they've put a machine on to act as her heart, and then they do these incredibly what's the word I'm looking for? Detailed operations on this tiny little heart, and they're not even, they're poking things all the way in to her body to be able to do this. It's not as if they can just like sew the heart together like this. They have to poke instruments in from a distance, and do it. There's different ways, and the way they did it with her was through a hole, like here to go towards her heart, but still, it's from the outside that they're doing these things. And it's just incredible technology that meant that she lived. Now, the spiritual side of that story is that I realized afterwards that, because I always wondered, why did I have this vision of this girl? It just didn't make any sense to me. But the Lord was telling me that, because He was showing me a vision of a 2 or 3 year old toddler, and so He was telling me she's going to live. But I didn't really realize that at the time. So afterwards I realized that was supposed to be comfort, and I guess it was. And in fact, the night before we took her to the hospital the first time, I was walking past her crib and felt prompted to give her a blessing. And I gave her a blessing, and 2 things happened. One, at the end of the blessing, I felt like I should leave my hands on her head for a while, and I felt strength, or spiritual strength, or something leave me and go to her. And secondly, I saw another vision of a kind of like a young single adult age, a university age girl. And anyway, so through both of these experiences, the Lord was showing me that she'll at least live to that age. And in her baby blessing, I was prompted to tell her that she would have a full life, whatever that means. And it doesn't matter. She'll have the life she's supposed to lead. The gospel's true. If she leaves to go back to heaven, then good for her. It's all in Heavenly Father's plan, and it's in His hands. But anyway, so my real point about this is the medical advancements that allow that to happen are just absolutely amazing. And before that, I was kind of really, I didn't really like the idea of these surgeons being paid so much money. above and beyond what normal people are paid to do their job. But after that, after watch what they did, I absolutely give it to them, because what they do is just amazing. There's no way I could do that job. And although those guys who do it, they have kind of somehow defective personalities. They don't have to know how to communicate with people to reassure them. But what they do with those instruments is just phenomenal. So that advancement, that's just one kind of advancement in these machines to keep the heart alive while they're doing operations, and these little instruments they use, and the machines they use to look inside, the ultrasounds and the X-rays, and all these things that. Can you just imagine what it was like to have none of it? You don't have to go back very far. That's the interesting thing about it. We found a book in my parents' attic that had been handed down through the family that dates back to sometime in the 1500s, and it's a physician's textbook, and it talks about putting leeches on to solve certain problems. Of course, it's all crazy, but that was what was in the doctor's textbook, how to do medical things. So it's changed an awful lot, and we've had these advancements. So the different kinds of advancements we talk about, just the drugs, just the advancement, just the discoveries of how disease is spread, the fact that there is disease, the fact that there are, we take it for granted, this idea that there are these little bacteria that spread. They didn't know that. They had no idea why diseases were happening. And then, when they first discovered that in London, where they were dealing with, I can't remember whether it was the plague or the Black Death, but whichever one it was, where they discovered that it was linked back to water, and then it was linked back to the state of the water in the rivers, and that was a major breakthrough. But then you start to come to things like penicillin, these drugs, these chemicals of different kinds that can solve medical problems. I mean, those are incredible advancements that change society. It changes things when people don't die all the time. It changes things that you can have different shots and travel to countries of the world that have dramatic diseases that your body's not used to. I don't know if you're all aware of this, but when the Europeans came to the Americas for the first time, so after Christopher Columbus discovered it, when the others were coming, there were millions of people in those cultures who were killed, not by the wars, not by the invasions, but by the diseases that the Europeans brought with them, because their bodies were not used to these diseases, and they didn't have any drugs or any injections that they could do. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting my terminologies tonight. It's late, but so when those kind of things happened, when diseases were spread from one culture to another, oftentimes they could wipe out almost an entire culture. There probably have been cultures who've been completely wiped out by alien diseases that come. When I say alien, I mean coming from a different country or a different culture when they mix. But now, of course, we can deal with that. We can have shots before we go. Immunizations, that's the word I was looking for earlier. You can have these immunizations, and there were polio was a big disease in the past, and there were lots of others that just don't exist in our countries, certainly in the West, and in most countries of the world don't exist anymore, because we have killed them through immunizations. And that makes a big difference to society. I'm going to let you think about and analyze the different ways it could. But there are just so many ways that it can affect it, and one is the one I've explained to you. This whole idea about how parents bond or have emotional connection to their children, or don't if they expect them to die. And we look back at some of the old cultures in literature and on films that we watch, and we see them as being sometimes less caring than we would be now. But I think that one of the reasons is that it must have been really hard to create emotional bonds to children when they were half of them were going to die, and you watch them die a lot. When you watch children die a lot, I'm sure that makes a difference. So medical advancements is just amazing. So now you go to hospitals, and the gadgets and the gizmos they have are just absolutely amazing, and they will I think I'm going to keep this discussion for later in the class when we talk about the future. But they're trying to discover ways to stop us from dying. There's a particular chemical that you're born with. Well, at least in the womb, while the body is growing, there's a particular kind of chemical that helps renew cells. And if it stayed around, your body could renew itself. Your brain cells could be renewed infinitely. But the last time I studied this, scientists have not been able to understand why it is that this chemical at a certain point just disappears. And at that point, we're then a ticking clock, because we're dying from that point onwards, because we do not renew our brain cells and our other cells. Well, we can renew some cells, but we can't grow back an arm. There are some animals that still have the ability to do that, like the iguana. That is it the iguana? Is that the one that where you chop a leg off and one will grow? Chameleon. Yeah, one of those. You chop a limb off and it will grow back, or some that you can chop a tail off and it will grow back. But for humans, we can't do that. We can't grow an arm back. But what if you could? And what if this chemical didn't disappear? What if somehow they could keep it around? Then, apart from having like severe accidents, you could in effect live forever. And this is where science is at medicine. This is what they're trying to discover, and of course they're trying to discover cures for cancer and cures for AIDS and all these other things, and no doubt they will. And we don't seem to be able to beat the flu somehow. It just keeps changing and morphing, but we just don't die of things like we used to. And that's one of the big things I wanted to talk about, this kind of emotional state or psychological perspective we have when people are dying all around of us and there's nothing you can do about it, or a society as it is now where we have hope because we can do something about it. How does that change? How does it change social structures? How does it change psychological perspectives and emotions and coping mechanisms and self-image and how does it affect the economy? Does medicine affect the economy? Oh boy, you bet it does. Medicine is a huge part of the economy, and I know people in America especially where the private health insurance functions the way it does, that if you're sick, permanently sick and having to have drugs every month, it takes a huge amount of your paycheck all the time, and you're going to be poor for the rest of your life because of the money you spend on the drugs that are keeping you alive. In the old days, you just die. Now you stay alive, but you probably won't be rich if you have some of those things. Or I know a person whose baby wasn't so fortunate as ours, and they struggled to try and keep it alive for like a month in intensive care. And as soon as your baby's in intensive care, the dollars are ticking over at a very rapid rate. And they ended up, their baby died in the end. They couldn't keep it alive, but there was $1 million bill, $1 million bill that the family were left with because they didn't have the insurance to cover it, and Medicare didn't cover it. So they in theory are going to be paying that off for the rest of their lives in small chunks. But imagine having $1 million bill because you tried to save a baby and you couldn't quite save it. All of these things are kind of fascinating about how they impact society, and terrifying at the same time. But if we can, they've been able to cure some things, and they can. You can't grow an arm back, but you can put a false arm, and they're starting to build like robot arms that you can attach to an arm where your fingers do move based on the signals coming from the brain. And neuroscience is another area of medicine that's improved enormously. In fact, I might put a video in this class. I think I will. About the brain, because the brain itself has an incredible capacity that they're learning to study and starting to be able to learn how to deal with medically. So it's a huge field for continued research, but so much has been done. But just think about that. If you had no access to medical technology, drugs and operations, heart transplants, if you're in the Middle Ages or in the past, and you explain that to somebody, I think they'd think you were completely loony, completely crazy, to take somebody's heart who has just died and put it in someone whose heart is failing, and to be able to connect it all together and make it work. That just blows me away. how they first figured out how to do that, and how they first made it happen. Can you imagine being there the first time they did a heart transplant and it worked? That is one of the most incredible breakthroughs of all time. So many people do have heart problems. Is this little muscle that pumps throughout our life? Yeah, can you think? You think about that. This muscle is pumping every minute of every day, and is just this permanent functioning thing. There's no car I'm aware of that functions that well. Every minute of every day. There's no mechanical thing I'm aware of that has that capacity. But the heart just keeps going and going and going. So of course, at some point, it's going to fail. And the ability that we can have to change it and to bring in a new one. Sooner or later, they're going to invent a fake heart they can put in there and somehow figure out how to stop the body rejecting it. And then how we've figured out how to deal with diabetes. In the past, people just died. They were very sick and then they died because they didn't have insulin. They didn't figure out these other things that we figured out through chemistry as well as other medical advancements. So you may have noticed I'm kind of animated about this subject area. It's one of I think the most amazing areas for study for how society changes or has changed because of medical advancements. So I'm going to let you kind of churn on that and think about it, but that's some of my thoughts.